Modded bosses. You either love them or you let your friends beat them for you and bring you all the loot. Either way, we're going to tier list every single boss I've ever fought and beaten personally, vanilla and modded. This video is 100% my own opinion, so feel free to leave your thoughts below. Our tiers are going to be best bosses, which are my favorite bosses to fight, pretty fun, which are bosses I find decently fun and will fight for more than just their drops, alright, which are pretty okay, but not fights I really seek out except for when I need their drops, EUGHH, which are ones I just plain don't like, and please fix this, which are hands down the bosses I hate the most. We'll start in that tier, but first, YouTube keeps telling me I should do calls to action, so here's your reminder to subscribe with notifs on and join the Discord so you don't miss an update from me. You can also find me on Twitch and TikTok, and if you like the content here, you can join as a channel member. Well, that's the ad read, so let's get into the video. Starting us off in the bottom of the please fix this tier is the Void Shadow from Adventure Z or Void Z. I tried really hard to write this in a nice way, but there is not a single thing you could do to make me willingly redo this boss fight. I hated it with every bone in my body, and the only reason I fought this boss was because it would allow me to hatch my dragon egg in my 200 days world. There is nothing positive I can say about this fight. It's repetitive in the worst way possible, it's confusing as hell, and it feels incredibly dragged out. It plays like it's a running simulator. Even after reading the wiki and watching other YouTubers fight this boss, I struggled to understand what to do to damage it. For those of you that don't know, the Void Shadow has to be damaged by void fragments, which are these crystal-like things that spawn on the platform. There are two types, and only one type damages the boss, the bigger ones if I remember correctly. When the Void Shadow gets to half health, it starts sweeping out over the platform and becomes susceptible to melee attacks, but it's immune to arrows and ranged attacks. I don't really get the vision, but I guess if the author likes it, then that's what matters. Absolute worst fight I've ever done by several miles. Next on the chopping block is also from Adventure Z, the Eye. One common trait a lot of these bosses toward the bottom have is this weird mechanic where they can just fly away from the player. I think the concept of having a giant eye to fight above the void is really cool, but I think bosses should almost always have a sort of arena that they can't stray too far from, and that's my biggest issue with the Eye. If I didn't have an elytra before I challenged this boss in my hardcore playthrough, I would have had a much harder time fighting it, and I will go out of my way to never have to fight this thing again. I wrote the script before I actually did fight it again, and the only reason I did was to help one of my friends on MSMP because we're playing Prominence 2 RPG Edition, and this is a required boss in order to finish progressing. And I'll have to kill it again because it didn't count because I beat them out of order, so I'm a little pissed about that, but regardless. I phrased it pretty much perfectly in my 200 Days in Better MC video. After I killed the Eye, it was time to move on to the Void Shadow, which was definitely going to be a big step up in regards to how challenging it is. One thing I don't like about these boss fights though is that they're very repetitive and they don't really seem to have that much uniqueness to them, or at least not uniqueness in the right way. Like, they're unique, they stand out, but the things that make them unique are the annoying mechanics about them. And it's just personally not my favorite. I think this boss is better fought underground. Summon it underground if you can. That's what we wound up doing on my server. Hailing from bosses of mass destruction, the next bosses in this tier are the Night Lich and the Nether Gauntlet. I'm pairing these two together because my criticism of them is very similar. If your boss can fly away from me, it should not be able to heal when I'm slightly out of its range. Let's talk about the Night Lich specifically for a second because I dislike it a lot more than the Nether Gauntlet. Thankfully, the Night Lich's health bar is split into 4 parts that stop it from healing too much, which is something I'm grateful for, and something that helps rectify that issue. But the Night Lich fight felt rather underwhelming. The attacks weren't that scary. It summoned minions, I guess, but I had an elytra and it's a flying boss, so they weren't crazy relevant when I fought it in Better MC, although the phantoms were a lot more annoying in Prominence. Finding the Night Lich and understanding how to summon it now, that's a point to talk about. I thought the tower bugged because the stars led me to it in the earliest days of my playthrough, and since nothing spawned, I just assumed something went wrong. It wasn't until I read the wiki that I realized I needed to put the stars into the altar to summon the boss, which is a flaw in my opinion, and a common one, especially among Minecraft mods. If I have to read your wiki to understand anything about the direction of your mod suffers from a similar core issue that base Minecraft suffers from. And it's not a huge deal because a lot of people will go out of their way and read the wiki, especially when it's around bosses. But I feel like I shouldn't have to at least get a good hint or a good nudge at what I'm meant to be doing. I'm not talking restricted progression because that's not Minecraft. That would completely ruin Minecraft. Only a few mods really pull that off well. But just something. You know? As for the Nether Gauntlet, I accidentally summoned it by messing with the building, which is a cool experience in my opinion, but it still is reminiscent of that major core issue. It's one thing that places it above the Night Lich for me, the fact that I was able to figure it out on my own. And on top of that, the attacks felt a lot more interactive and fun to dodge. But back to bosses flying away from the player, this one is one I've had a lot of bad experiences with that happening. In my first experience trying to take on this boss, the boss literally broke out of its structure and started healing, and because I had run out of fireworks at that point, I couldn't effectively follow it. A fun fight, but it has some core issues that knock it down quite far from me. I also think the animations bugged during my latest encounter with this boss, so that kind of threw me off because I heard sound that didn't match what I was seeing. And on top of that, the boss completely destroyed the upper part of its arena in prominence for one of the players on the server. And I don't know what was going on, but it was a very weird thing to try to fit. It was very weird. I tried helping that person fight the boss and I kept getting one shot in quite insane armor. Ending us off in the please fix this tier, we have the Minnow Shroom. The Minnow Shroom is the worst Twilight Forest boss in my opinion, and for a couple of reasons. I get the whole gimmick with the Minotaur and the labyrinth and the references to mythology, but I ultimately feel like it falls pretty flat in comparison to the other bosses from the mod. I'd say it's technically a mini boss, but it's required in order to progress fully through Twilight Forest, so I included it here. This boss comes later and after some more difficult bosses, so I've never fought the Minnow Shroom and actually struggled. The hard part is the labyrinth, which can feel repetitive, especially since this fight comes after the Night Phantom, which is also in a maze. The Minnow Shroom just isn't as strong as the other bosses and tends to get cheesed very easily, and I can't even say I really remember my fight with it that much. I more so just remember being pissy with the maze. I think the Minnow Shroom doesn't scale very well with the rest of the Twilight Forest bosses, which is an issue that we see with the Alpha Yeti. I'll talk about that later, but that's my whole opinion on it. At the bottom of the EUGHH tier, we have the Elder Guardian. I wanted to put this one higher than I did, and he's also our first vanilla boss. I wanted him higher because I find him to be quite unique as far as bosses go. I think the Elder Guardian could be improved upon quite a lot though, with the drops maybe being increased and maybe giving him some more unique attacks. I think maybe having him drop some Nautilus shells or even a Heart of the Sea would be a much better idea. It would make the conduit much more accessible and on players' radars. To be honest, I don't think I ever fought the Elder Guardian with more early game gear until very recently when I was fixated on having an underwater base last month on MSMP. That is also the first time I ever built a conduit, so maybe that should also tell a few things. I kind of just wish this boss was more of a boss, if that makes sense. The Alpha Yeti from the Twilight Forest is technically also a mini boss, but I think you have to kill him to progress, so he counts. I think his fight stands out much more than the Minnow Shroom because some of the attacks and mechanics are a bit unique, so he lands a bit higher for me, but in many ways he suffers from the same issues. I think he's just too weak, and he doesn't scale with the bosses very well. At least I'm not forced into another maze to fight him though, so that's something. The fact that he just chucks players is also pretty fun, and I like the frozen aesthetic, so props for that. I feel like the issue with the Twilight Forest is the Alpha Yeti and the Minnow Shroom tend to just feel like nuisances that you have to go take care of before you can get to the actually fun fights. The Hydra is also hailing from the Twilight Forest and is our first major boss from it. Unfortunately, I think the Hydra is rather underwhelming. It has so much potential, but it doesn't really do anything crazy unique. It can set you on fire and the heads multiply, which is absolutely cool, but it just really feels like I'm smacking the boss and not doing much else. Dodging the heads trying to bite the player can be fun, but I think it would be really cool if they could grab onto you and kind of chuck you the way the Alpha Yeti does. I think in a pre-netherite world, the fiery blood armor you get from this fight is pretty cool, and it's rather creative, but I wish the model was a bit different than it is. It could be cool if it was instead a sort of Hydra Slayer set and maybe featured some Hydra scales. I'm not talking about changing any of the actual armor values, because even with its current values, it still holds up pretty well in a post-netherite world, but I'm talking more design, I think, here. Here's a quick sketch of what I mean, and to be honest, I think I'm just a sucker for dragon-like armor, so this is really just what I would do in my own little world. The Snow Queen is also from the Twilight Forest. She's a rather underwhelming fight, and I personally didn't feel it was very memorable. The reason I place her above the Hydra is because the loot you get from raiding her tower makes it feel a lot more worth it to go there and explore versus the kind of mid-maze loot you get from other bosses. I get it though, she's later game than them, so it makes sense. Her actual fight is not great, but I like the idea. I suppose it's kind of hard to try to port snow magic into Minecraft, but it could be cool if she had a few different ice attacks rather than just slam down, summon minions, or throw ice balls. I mean, listen, I grew up in a snowy place with an older sister, so I know how much ice balls hurt, so I'm not gonna say get rid of them, but how cool would it be if she like summoned ice spikes under the player or froze them in solid blocks of ice? Topping off the EUGHH tier is Rehovart from Lycanite mobs, specifically the version from 2.8.2 RLcraft, which is how I'm going to be scaling the Lycanite bosses. The only reason this guy gets to be higher is because I think the fight against him can be a lot of fun, and it was in the past, but he is the easiest boss to cheese, or he was last time I fought him. He's more down a bit lower for other reasons, such as the fact that he ended a 100 days challenge for me and I lost it because of this little fuck It's a bit more personal. This was a few years ago before I fully got into doing YouTube, but I was pissed. Outside of that, I think Rehovart looks cool and his fight is alright, but he's a little underwhelming and he's the most bland out of all the Lycanite bosses. I also wanted to add as a quick note before we move on, I will only be including the final bosses for Lycanites because if I included every boss and every mini boss from that mod, it could be its own video, and honestly it might wind up being its own tier list. Next we have the alright tier, which are ones that are alright. I mean, they're not great, they're not the best, but they're better than previous. In the bottom of the alright tier, we have our second vanilla boss, the Wither. Easily cheesed and not that great, the Wither mostly wins this spot because it's a classic and a fun concept. I think the Wither is one of the biggest sore spots with Minecraft because most people will never fight it or even know it's out there. It highlights the issue I mentioned before of Minecraft needing to be something you've experienced before you get the most out of it, or being something you need to read a wiki about first. I don't think games should hold your hand, and I think if Minecraft did, it would completely ruin it, but I think progression or something hinting at the Wither should be a little more obvious. At least they started doing something more with this by adding ruined portals to the world so people are aware of the Nether, but I think it's not quite enough of a nudge. The actual fight with the Wither usually just involves a long tunnel in a small area dug out for him underground, and I think the fact that players are forced into doing this, or the fire flies away, is kind of stupid. Outside of that, he's fun, he's a classic, and his drop is really good, so. Both from the Blue Skies mod, the Alchemist and Summoner are very similar bosses that spawn in identical dungeons. The Alchemist is in the Everdawn, the more warm and hostile dimension, and the Summoner is in the Everbright, the bright and frigid dimension, with some large and interesting mobs. The Summoner is okay, he mostly just pelts you with other enemies and teleports away, which is a bit annoying, but he's locked in the room with you, so it doesn't pose the same issue as some of the others on this list. He could be more unique, but I suppose his name is the Summoner and his whole gimmick is that he summons things, so I'm not going to hold it to him too much. Exploring his dungeon is a lot of fun, as is the Alchemist's. I'd say I hold the Alchemist a little higher because instead of throwing other mobs and entities at you, it chucks potions, which was my favorite way to fight back on the Xbox 360 when we had those little mini games. It also does some other kinds of spells which can be fun to dodge. I like him a bit more than the Summoner, but it's not that much of a difference. Both are fun, but not the greatest fights, and they're not near as creative as some of the other bosses not only on this list, but from this very mod. Asmodeus, our second Lycanite final boss, falls here for a lot of reasons that I've already stated. The three Lycanite bosses each have their own thing going on, but Asmodeus and Rehovart are more on the basic end of things. The attacks aren't super unique, and I don't really have a whole lot to say about him. He's not bad to fight, and it can be fun, but he's forgettable even at the best of times. The Queen of Minecraft, the Ender Dragon, is one almost all of us have fought at one point or another, or at least have seen other people fight. She's a classic. She follows a set pattern of behavior that's easy to get a hang of while still providing a good challenge. Unfortunately, she can be cheesed very easily with beds, but there are mods out there that make the crystals respawn, spawn in other structures, etc, etc. Not counting those in this ranking. I wish there was a little more direction that would take the player to the end of the game, but I can also see that bosses aren't ultimately the point of Minecraft. As much as I am the type of player to speedrun getting maxed out on everything ASAP, a lot of people play Minecraft to explore, build, and relax. The majority of the player base hasn't even been to the end, so you know. But I think the game should lead people to her more easily, and while I love the fact that the Ender Dragon can be respawned, I personally didn't even know that was a thing until I started doing Minecraft content, and that's wild to me. The Fallen Icon is one of the bosses I added very last minute as I'm playing through Prominence 2 RPG on MSMP this month, and my friend Buttercreep asked me to join him while I was writing the script, and I figured why not. The boss is from Miriam's Souls-like Weaponry, which is a new mod to me, and he does scary damage, at least in the second phase. He two-shotted my friend and nearly did the same to me. The actual model and animations for the boss are really cool, and I'll admit it had me running and hiding while I healed. It has an interesting attack where it'll slam down its weapon, and it's fun to dodge. If you don't dodge it and you don't have great armor, you can count yourself dead. This is the only boss from this list from Miriam's Souls-like Weaponry, and it's the only boss from that mod that I've fought, but I can't wait to explore more of them as I finish playing out Prominence 2. The reason I drop it into this tier is because it felt a little underwhelming, but I will admit it's likely because my friend and I both did crazy damage very fast, and the boss wasn't even locked onto me for the majority of its attacks. I think the two phases it has are interesting, and he does insane damage during the Harbinger of Moonlight phase like I talked about. I also think the sword attack and animations from that phase are really cool, but like I said, this boss doesn't stick out to me as one I would go fight again just for fun. The Night Phantom is another boss from the Twilight Forest, and it's the top of the alright tier. It's not my favorite boss by a long shot, but the fight with it feels rather unique and fun. This is the first boss boss you'll go after that's in a maze, so instead of feeling a bit stale like the minnow shroom does or some of the other bosses do, it feels pretty unique in comparison to the other two you'll encounter first. It's a weird one to place because I feel it stands out and I didn't have a poor experience, but I also wouldn't go out of my way to fight him unless I needed the drops or had to complete a quest. It's not the best, but it's not horrible, and the fact that there are multiple knights you have to fight makes it a bit more interesting, and it's kind of sequential. You have to kill the real knight, which changes every time you kill one, and you can tell by how opaque the body is. Moving on from the alright tier, we're going into pretty fun, which are boss fights that I think are pretty fun, and I would seek the boss out just to fight them for the fun of it. I wasn't sure if I should include the dragons from Ice and Fire, but not every boss in this game requires a boss bar, and I think the tier 5 dragons count as bosses. The fire dragon is an interesting fight, and I don't think they're as hard as the ice dragons are. I haven't fought a tier 5 lightning dragon yet, as I tend to play on older versions of this mod, but I will say a few things. I think fire dragons are such a menace in the early game, and being able to finally kill them feels amazing. I also love that the tier 5s in particular have a chance to drop dragon eggs and let you hatch your own dragon. The armor you get from them is also amazing, and it looks cool on top of that. Fire dragons are one spot below ice dragons because I feel ice dragons are a bit more of a challenge. For the fire ones, you can pop a fire res potion and have some good blast prot and you're good to go, but ice dragons are a bit more complicated than that. Overall, they're free from the criticisms I tend to have about flying bosses because they're limited and must stay within a certain range of their nests, and I think that's a great way to do it. The tier 5 dragons that break out of their roosts are a bit annoying because they tend to fly away infinitely from the player, but after you catch up, they do actually fight you versus just continuing to run. The fact that the dragon can pick up the player is also something really cool to me, and I think that's why I wish the Hydra could do something similar. Again, I think it's important to remember that bosses don't need boss bars. The Warden, although it's not meant to be fought in vanilla Minecraft, is one of the scariest bosses on this list. My first time killing a Warden was, you guessed it, in my hardcore better Minecraft world. The Warden's such a unique boss in the way it revolves around sound and the way the skulk sensors work. I'm not gonna lie, exploring an ancient city is terrifying when you don't have a way to teleport out if you spawn in a Warden. The sounds it makes, the way it locates the player, it's also eerie and I love it. But because the Warden wasn't designed to be a boss the player is meant to challenge, it suffers from key issues. The main ability that deals a lot of damage can't be dodged and it doesn't drop anything, etc, etc. Again, there are mods to fix this, but I digress. One of the last 3 Twilight Forest bosses, the EUGHH, is a unique challenge that can be incredibly frustrating, but also incredibly fun. I think the Twilight Forest relies a little too heavily on mazes and structures that are meant to confuse the player, but I think it works with the EUGHH and its little puzzles. I spent an embarrassingly long amount of time trying to figure out the main one, but I'll leave that alone. I think it's a bit of a confusing fight when it comes down to it, and I really don't like it when players are forced into reading the wiki, but it's a fun fight. I would 100% do it again just for fun. Also from the Twilight Forest, the Twilight Lich is a bit of a unique boss. It's one of the first 2 bosses you fight in the mod's progression, and it's a scary fight because of its explosive attacks that can be devastating to players even in higher tiers of armor. It also comes with an interesting structure to explore that thankfully is not some kind of a maze. The different phases in this one are also interesting, and they make for more interactive fights than what a lot of the other ones we've covered offer. I think it's just not personally one of my top favorite bosses, but I'm not going to pass up a Twilight Lich boss tower and not kill it. Topping off the pretty fun tier, the Obsidiolith from Bosses of Mass Destruction is also one of the very recent ones I fought while playing Prominence 2. It just barely doesn't make the top tier, but it was one of my favorites as of late. I think the fight with it is a bit lacking, but dodging the abilities this one throws at the player is quite a lot of fun. It flings you up in the air, sets you on fire, freezes you, etc, etc. And the air one is so fun. It also stomps on you at certain points, which is goofy as hell. It being summoned with a single Eye of Ender is also nice, since it's not some super expensive thing to fight the way the Eye is. For those of you that don't know, the Eye, that we already talked about, requires a fucking dragon egg to summon. Once you kill it, you get the egg back, but with the boss flying away from you like that, I don't know, I can't keep ranting about the Eye. Let's move on. The only Aether boss I've ever fought, the Slider starts off the best bosses tier. The fight I had with it was so fun, and dodging the Slider as it tries to smush you is a lot of fun. If I remember correctly, it's one of the lower bosses, and I don't remember the loot I got, so I can't really say if it was 100% worth it, but I had a fun time fighting it and would 100% seek this boss out again just for the fun of it. This definitely showed me I need to see more of the Aether mod, but I fought this boss quite a while ago, so I don't really have much more to recap. It was just one of my favorite fights, and I would not pass it up if I got the chance to fight it again. The final Twilight Forest boss, and third in this tier list overall, the Naga is one of my favorite bosses to fight. It's the first boss the player can fight in the Twilight Forest, and it's honestly my favorite. The way it bonks itself on your shield and is stunned for a bit of time is so silly, but so cool. The way it scales in difficulty as you fight is also really nice, and I feel it's a more unique fight than most of the ones I've done. You get some good armor at the end, the loot's not bad, a good bow and a bucket of water are really helpful, and I think a shield is a must in this fight. I don't remember if the mod directed me to the Naga and had me bring a shield or tipped me off to that, or if the wiki did, because the first time I fought the Naga was on a hardcore world and I didn't want to die, so I did read a little bit of it first. One of my favorite bosses overall. Our final boss from Blue Skies, the Starlit Crusher, is one of the best boss fights I've ever done. I recently went back and killed it, and I think this boss has some of the most fun and interactive abilities or attacks that I've ever seen. From the roots it summons from the floor to the more defensive fighting style it has in general, this boss is one of the best designed and most fun fights I've had, and it comes with this huge labyrinth to explore and loot. I don't harp on the whole maze thing with this mod because they don't really rely on it as much as Twilight Forest does. I think the Arachnarch, one of the Everdawn bosses, is also in a labyrinth, but I've not fought it personally, so I can't vouch. The Starlit Crusher can be found in the Everbright, and you have to actually progress in the Everbright and get your gear from there in order to be effective when fighting. I think the Aether does something similar, but it's a feature I like to see because of how much it can lengthen progression. The top of this list may be a bit of a controversial pick, but I really love the Amalgalich from Lycanite's mobs. This boss stands out to me as really unique, and it's a lot of fun. It's also pretty difficult. It's especially fun when paired with a grappling hook to avoid the suck ability it's known for. While that can be frustrating, especially if you're new to the mod and didn't really know, I think it's fun once you know what you're doing. It has distinct phases, and it was my favorite boss to fight in RLcraft back when I was still playing it as much as I was. To my knowledge, now you can only summon this boss in the Lost Cities mod in RLcraft, which is a really laggy mod, especially when paired with SR Parasites, so I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that, but I digress. And that's the end of my tier list. There are a few bosses that I think I would shift around again for just a lot of different reasons, most of it just my personal experience and how much I like certain abilities or dislike others. I'm sure a lot of you disagree with my tier list, but let me know your thoughts down below. I'm really talkative in the comments, especially under these videos, and I'm a small enough creator to respond to just about everybody, so it works out. Do you agree, disagree? What bosses do you love? What bosses do you hate? Do you like the flying away stuff, or do you hate it as much as I do? Feel free to let me know in the comments below. As always, remain respectful, but you guys are always really good at that, so I don't really feel the need to remind you. Thank you for tuning in, and if you made it to the end of the video, thank you for watching all the way through to the end. It really helps, especially as I'm a really small content creator. And then just thank you to channel members at this moment. We have our very first one, which is Arcs. So thank you for your support. Catch you guys in 3 to 4 days with a new video, and have a great day. Bye-bye!